On New Year's Eve, the streets of Elm Creek pulsed with a kind of magic that only came once a year and only lingered for an evening. The town, quiet through most winters, transformed overnight into a glittering carnival of light and laughter. Families gathered under lampposts wrapped in pine garlands and fairy lights, their breath rising in white clouds as they sipped from paper cups of hot cider. Brass instruments gleamed in the hands of marching bands, and distant fireworks, still waiting for midnight, gave the promise of skyborn celebration. The air smelled of cinnamon, fried dough, and anticipation. Emma Brooks, 6 years old and bundled like a snowman in a puffed blue coat, stood on tiptoes to see over the crowd. Her gloved hand was nestled firmly in her mother's, swinging gently with each skip of excitement. She loved the sound of the drums, the blare of trumpets, the cartoon characters made real on floats passing like dreams on wheels. Every minute brought a new wonder, a giant candy cane twirled by dancers in green velvet, a school mascot dressed as a penguin tossing candy, even a juggler who lit torches with his breath. Caroline Brooks smiled as she watched her daughter's eyes widen with every new sight. There was something delicate in the way Emma observed the world, quietly, curiously, as if she was collecting its secrets to keep safe. Caroline had noticed this trait early on, long before Emma could speak in full sentences. At playgrounds, Emma didn't run to the slides or shout with other children. She studied the way the wind moved the swings, how ants circled a spilled drop of juice, how shadows changed shape beneath the trees. She was an old soul, some had said, but Caroline thought her daughter was simply gentle in a way the world rarely noticed. It had been a difficult year for them both. Caroline, recently let go from her job at the community library due to budget cuts, had pieced together part-time work shelving books in a university archive and proofreading manuscripts from home. Most days passed in routine, school drop-offs, grocery store lists, heating leftovers for dinner. She rarely had time for reflection, let alone celebration. But tonight felt different. It felt like something she owed Emma, a few hours where wonder could exist without interruption. The parade was their tradition. It had been since Emma was 3 and still learning her colors from the shimmering costumes and banners that passed through Main Street each December 31st, Caroline always took the same spot, near the old war memorial and under the overhang of a hardware store that hadn't changed its signage since the 70s. She brought a thermos of cocoa and extra mittens, even if Emma refused to wear them. Every year, they made a memory to carry into the next. But memory is fragile. It happened in a blink. One blink. Caroline had just reached into her coat pocket, where her phone buzzed with a text from her sister in another state. A quick glance, just long enough to read, sent a photo of Emma by the floats. She looked up again, and the hand in hers was gone. At first, she didn't panic. Emma often shifted positions, sometimes ducking for a better view or leaning forward toward the barriers. But seconds passed, and there was no sign of her. She turned in place, scanning the faces and coats and children bundled in colors. She called her name, once, then twice, each time louder, more urgent. No answer. No tiny boots. No blue coat. No Emma. She started moving through the crowd, pushing past elbows and strollers, shouting her daughter's name with a rising pitch that betrayed her fear. People turned to look, puzzled, and then turned away again. Some tried to offer comfort. Others avoided her eyes. She reached the curb and climbed the short steps of the war memorial, hoping for height, for any glimpse. But the crowd was too thick, the noise too loud, the lights too blinding. She approached a man in a reflective vest, someone she assumed was part of the event staff, and told him what had happened. His response was calm, dismissive. Children wandered all the time. She should check the lost child station near the gazebo. She went. Nothing. A police officer near the barricades took her information, wrote down a description, but she could tell he had heard it before, too many times from anxious parents whose children were always found nearby. But Caroline knew this was different. Emma didn't wander. She wasn't impulsive. She held onto her mother's hand like it was the only thing anchoring her to the world. The thought of her daughter out there, alone in this living, moving ocean of strangers, tightened her throat until she could barely breathe. Time began to slip, to bend. Each minute stretched like chewing gum. Her legs moved without thought, retracing steps, eyes scanning beneath benches, behind food carts, between legs and coats and crowd barriers. The thermos was still in her coat pocket, warm and forgotten. Her fingers clenched around it as if it were Emma's hand. She imagined every possibility. What if someone had taken her? What if she was crying behind a float, hidden by costume and smoke? What if she had followed the wrong woman in the same coat and was now lost, frightened, calling out into a crowd that did not hear her? Caroline's heart pounded like the drums still echoing through the parade. Every instinct screamed to run, to shout louder, to pull on every coat sleeve until someone helped, until someone saw what she saw, that a child had vanished and the world kept dancing. She pressed through the crowd toward the last place she'd seen Emma standing. The candy vendor was still there, calling out deals over a megaphone. The balloon man continued twisting his rubber creations, unaware. Fireworks burst overhead. The sky celebrated, and Caroline stood frozen beneath it. Somewhere, her daughter was gone. Emma Brooks had been taught something most children never hear. It wasn't a bedtime story or a nursery rhyme. It was a rule, clear and specific, woven into the quiet spaces of her childhood. When you are lost and can't find a police officer, look for bikers with patches. Most would have laughed at that. Some already had. Caroline knew it sounded unusual, even dangerous. But she had a reason. Years ago, long before Emma was born, Caroline had nearly died on a winter road outside Portland. Her old sedan had slid on a patch of black ice, flipping into a snowy ditch where cell service dropped to zero and visibility was worse. Her legs were pinned. The heater had died within minutes. She remembered her breath coming out in jagged white clouds, the burning cold biting into her hands as she tried to reach the glove compartment where her flashlight had fallen. She hadn't thought she would survive that night. But then, through the blowing snow, came headlights, not from a tow truck or a patrol car, but from a long line of motorcycles. At first, she thought she was hallucinating. Who would be riding in a blizzard? They had been on their way back from a holiday charity ride, the kind where bikers gathered donated toys for children in hospitals. Their vests were heavy with patches, symbols of different clubs and chapters. Without hesitation, they had pulled her from the wreck, wrapped her in their jackets, and carried her to one of their trucks. They used scarves and gloves to warm her fingers, gave her hot coffee from a thermos, and didn't ask a single question until she was safe. She never saw them again. No names. No photos. Just the fading image of men and women with wind-burned faces and steady hands, people who saw her not as a victim or a burden, but as someone in need. From then on, she had told Emma the rule. Quietly. Casually. Over breakfast, in the car, while tying shoelaces. If you get lost, find a police officer. But if you can't, if they're too far or not around, look for the bikers with patches. Because not all angels have wings. Now, as Emma stood amid the chaos of the Elm Creek parade, that strange lesson floated up through her fear like a buoy in deep water. She had only noticed the emptiness of her hand a few seconds after it happened. One moment her mother was beside her, and the next, the crowd had shifted like the tide, swallowing everything familiar. She had spun around, calling softly at first, then louder. But the drums, the fireworks, the voices, they all blended into something loud and formless. Emma wasn't the kind of child who panicked. She had her mother's quiet. That stillness that could make her seem older than her years. But her hands were trembling now, and the corners of her eyes stung. She stood on her toes and tried to find the war memorial, the hardware store awning, any landmark that might bring her back. Nothing. She remembered the rule. Her small boots stepped carefully over the curb, weaving through the crowd. The noise pulsed in waves, booming music from speakers, the occasional whistle from parade marshals, and bursts of applause as floats passed. Emma scanned faces, eyes wide, searching not for her mother now, but for leather vests. And then she saw it. Across the street, near a cafe she'd never noticed before, a group of people stood by parked motorcycles. They weren't in costume. They weren't holding balloons or cameras. They stood tall, their jackets lined with stitched emblems. The patches were different, some round, some square, but they all told the same story. This was a group that rode together. Emma hesitated. The bikers were laughing softly, passing around cups of something warm, their breath curling in the cold air. One of them, a tall man with a beard that reminded her of storybook giants, noticed her first. His smile faded as he took in her expression. The girl standing alone. The dampness around her eyes. The slight shaking in her hands. She approached. Her boots scraped the pavement softly, the kind of sound only heard by people who listen. She reached him and stopped. Looked up. Remembered to speak slowly like her mom taught her when she was nervous. "I lost my mom," she said. The man bent down, his large hand resting on his knee to meet her eye level. His leather jacket creaked slightly as he moved. Behind him, the others had already fallen silent. He asked her name, and when she said Emma Brooks, his eyes flickered, just for a second. He nodded and called over his shoulder. A woman stepped forward from the group. She wore a vest, too, but her hair was woven into a turquoise braid that hung over her shoulder like a ribbon of water. Emma felt something ease inside her. The woman didn't ask questions, didn't tell her to calm down. She knelt down and offered her gloved hand, which Emma took without hesitation. It was warm. Steady. The group moved quickly after that. Not rushed, but with purpose. One biker took out a walkie-talkie. Another began dialing on a phone. Someone else moved toward the street, scanning the crowd. They formed a quiet perimeter, not drawing attention, but ensuring Emma was never alone, never unguarded. The woman with the turquoise braid took off her scarf and wrapped it gently around Emma's shoulders. "You're safe now," she whispered, not with words, but in the way she adjusted the scarf, and the way she stayed close without crowding. Emma sat on a bench near the cafe's window, her feet swinging above the pavement. Inside, the glass was fogged from the warmth, and behind her, she could hear the bikers coordinating, giving updates, describing Caroline in calm, measured tones. Someone mentioned the police. Another said they had eyes on the main float route. None of them left her side. And though she couldn't name it at the time, something in Emma settled. A certainty, perhaps, that she had been found by exactly the right people. That what her mother had said was true, not all guardians wore uniforms. Some came wrapped in leather and kindness. As the parade continued, unnoticed by the child now wrapped in turquoise wool, a quiet search began, not just for a missing girl, but for the woman who had once been saved by this very same road family. Months passed, and the story of what happened in Elm Creek became something more than a memory. It was retold at school drop-offs, whispered over coffee counters, shared between neighbors who had never spoken before. Emma Brooks had been found. That was the simplest part. But how she had been found, and by whom, left a mark that wouldn't fade. At Elm Creek Elementary, where Emma returned a week after the parade, the event was still fresh in the children's minds. Some had been at the parade. Others had heard stories from parents. A few even knew what a biker patch looked like now. And one quiet Wednesday morning, something happened that made all of it real. Career Day was a long-standing tradition. Parents and local professionals came to talk about their jobs. There was always a firefighter, sometimes a nurse, a banker, a veterinarian if someone got lucky. That year, the principal had made an unusual addition. He didn't give details, only asked the students to listen carefully and treat every guest with respect. Emma sat cross-legged on the gym floor beside her classmates. Her new vest, a small denim one, was slightly oversized but softened by wear. It had one large patch sewn on the back, a gift from the woman with the turquoise braid. The words were simple, protected by the Road family. When the tall man in the black leather vest walked to the front of the room, the students fell silent. He was not what they expected. His boots were worn, his hands withered, and the patches on his vest looked like symbols from a secret language. Some of the kids looked nervous. Some curious. But he spoke softly. He didn't talk about engines or speed. He didn't tell stories of roads or rallies. Instead, he talked about watchfulness. About being the kind of person who doesn't look away when someone is in trouble. He explained that strength wasn't about muscle, but about standing still when others run, about being calm when the world is loud. He said that loyalty was not to a group, but to a principle, that nobody gets left behind, not in war, not in the cold, not in a crowd. He never mentioned Emma by name. But everyone knew. The teachers watched with a kind of quiet awe. And when the man finished, no one clapped right away. They just sat in silence, the kind of silence that meant something had changed. After the assembly, Emma approached him with her small steps and serious eyes. He knelt down to her level and tapped the patch on her vest with 2 fingers. No words passed between them. None were needed. At home, Caroline kept the turquoise scarf folded beside the photo of Emma's father, who had died in service overseas before Emma was born. She had never expected the 2 parts of her life to connect, the man she lost and the strangers who saved her. But there it was, quietly mended by time, snow, and one child's courage. Things shifted in Elm Creek. Not all at once. But enough. The Iron Bean Cafe began hosting Sunday breakfasts for veterans and first responders, organized by the biker group and staffed by volunteers. A mural appeared on the side of the old hardware store, painted by local students and paid for by anonymous donations. It showed Emma's small hand in a leather-gloved one, standing under a sky of stars shaped like motorcycle wheels. At town meetings, the mayor mentioned kindness more often. At school, Emma's teacher began including lessons on empathy and service. At the library, where Caroline had once shelved books part-time, a new shelf appeared, Stories of Quiet Heroes. No one forgot what had happened. Not because of the danger, but because of what it revealed. That help can come from unexpected places. That protection sometimes looks like tattoos and boots and leather. And that a child taught a strange little rule had turned it into a truth the whole town learned to see. Caroline often thought back to that moment outside the cafe, when she had finally found Emma, safe, warm, wrapped in a scarf that had once shielded her own skin from snow and fear. The woman with the turquoise braid had simply nodded. Recognition had passed between them like a current. Neither had spoken of the night on the road years before. They didn't need to. The circle had closed. What was given had returned. And the lesson Caroline had whispered through the years, passed to a daughter like a secret, had become something larger. Something visible. Something permanent. In the spring, a bronze plaque was mounted beside the war memorial, where Caroline had first lost sight of her daughter. It read, "In honor of those who serve quietly. For the guardians we don't always see. For kindness, without question." And beneath it, a smaller inscription, chosen by Emma herself. "When I was scared, they were there." That was the legacy. Not banners or sirens or medals. But a child returned, a town awakened, and strangers seen for what they had always been. Kindness without question is enough.